And then red hat is the one that is more emotional. So, some of us are more heart people, other people are more head people. So what DeBono's hats does in an exercise where you're making a decision or brainstorming, especially generating ideas, is that it asks you, now we're all in a red hat moment. And all of you have to practice red hat. Like, what is your heart saying? And then we all get to kind of tap into that part of ourselves, which we all have. Then now we're all in yellow hat.
Hello, yes people. Welcome to another episode of the Yes Girls, where we, Claire
and Akumu,
say yes to doing, being, or learning something new and documenting our journeys. Akumu, what would you do if you had to choose between saving 3 people's lives or...
Whoa. Wait, that got serious very quickly. Slow down a bit.
Okay, maybe we should say what today's show is all about first.
This season, we are saying yes, as you know, to in-studio challenges to get to grips with must-have 21st century skills. And this challenge, say it with me, is
saying yes to doing critical thinking. As we kick off this new season, can we get a review of a recent episode?
Here's a short piece of feedback from one of our biggest yes guys. He's at Ben_Okumu.
Not Akumu, but
not
Okumu.
Akumu. Yes, Claire, got that. You know the difference, right?
Of course. One's you, one's not you.
I still teach some Kenyans the difference. Anyway, we are not related, but we could be because he's the love of this podcast. So he said, I'm a member of JQR Gavel Toastmasters Club, and I can confirm that the R counter can leave you disoriented throughout your whole speech.
So if you don't know what Ben's referring to, scroll up just a bit on your podcast feed to the episode where we said yes to doing public speaking and find out what or who the R counter is. Or you can also maybe see me on social media being caught out by the R counter.
Yes.
So if you've not yet rated and reviewed us, go ahead and do it, pretty please. It really does help others to discover the show, and then they can be grateful to you for bringing a little more yes into their lives.
Anyway, time to get on with this episode and meet our expert. We've got some critical thinking to do.
Yes. This season, it's all about what we can do in studio, so we can make it even more blindingly obvious that you and we can say yes to something new, even if you're short on time.
So without further ado, let's hear it from today's expert. Laila Macharia is a lawyer by training, an investor, an entrepreneur by choosing, there are lots of commas coming later on, an international business expert and inspiration to generations. She has brought the Aspen Institute to Africa, which is all about thinking and smarter conversations, and also one of the people behind ADMI, the Africa Digital Media Institute. Need we say more? Laila, why do you think we asked you to be today's expert?
I wonder, because part of critical thinking is actually accepting that you're not an expert and you still have a lot to learn. But I think you asked me here because I think about this issue a lot. And I'm a real advocate for people thinking better and having smarter conversations, challenging their assumptions. I grew up in many different countries. And as you know, when people have that experience, they have to examine their assumptions, rebuild their values afresh, think about why they do what they do and what they assume. So I am a real advocate for this, and I'm on a mission to, much like you, help young people and even not so young liberate themselves by being able to get closer to the truth by thinking critically. But we'll talk more about that.
Nice.
Awesome. I can't wait. So this episode, we're first going to carry out a challenge with Laila as judge, challenger, and all-seeing, all-knowing guest expert, or maybe not, as the case may be. As you pointed out, being open to always questioning ourselves. She'll then rate us, and then we'll get to hear from her about her professional trajectory and top tips for staying calm and tackling some cumbersome questions head on.
Okay, so I'll give you guys the challenge. It's a moral dilemma. This one is called the Overcrowded Lifeboat, and it's very famous across the world. So the American ecologist and philosopher Garrett Hardin put forward the notion of lifeboat ethics as early as 1974, which I know for some of our listeners sounds like the Dark Ages, or
Yes.
like when Christ was alive,
Yeah.
like that.
Renaissance.
Yeah.
Period.
So he compared the Earth to a lifeboat carrying 50 people, with 100 people in the water needing rescue. The lifeboat has room for just 10 more. Oh, how tragic. The people in the boat represent the rich developed nations, while the swimmers in the sea are the poor. But now already we have put a frame on this, people from underdeveloped countries. It's a metaphor for the distribution of resources in an overpopulated world, and it raises many questions. But let's just go back to the metaphor. So here we are. We've said that we have, the boat has 50 people. There's 100 people in the world, in the water, and you have space for just 10 more. So you have the unfortunate challenge of deciding who gets to be on the boat
There are 100
and
people
not drown. Yes,
outside. And
Only
the outside
10.
has mixed.
it's mixed.
It's mixed. Ooh,
There are also some people on the boat,
Mhm.
and you're free to decide what to do.
Who are the 50?
It's just a mix
Oh,
of,
it's also a mix. Okay.
oh, those are the rich people, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So
The
there's
50 are
already
the
all the
rich.
rich people on the boat. Lots of rich people on the boat.
How would you decide?
So the
Out
people
of
in the water
100.
are a mix,
Mm-hmm.
or they're all they're from the underdeveloped, less developed countries.
All of them. All the 100.
The 100 people in the water needing rescue. The lifeboat?
Yeah. Are
Has
they
50.
all underdeveloped? The ones
Yes,
in the
yes.
water?
Oh, yes. I mean, they're already in the water. So you can
okay.
see,
Okay.
even when it's not developed and underdeveloped,
Mm.
you can imagine a lifeboat.
Mm.
It has limited capacity. There's people in the water needing rescue, obviously. How do you go about deciding what to do next?
Right. So we need to, even if we don't
10
want to,
minutes.
we have to
Huh?
set 5
Some
minutes.
type chose.
We
10
have
minutes?
to categorize.
We have to decide, do we start with gender?
Why would we start with
They
gender?
always do that. Like even in the Titanic, they said women and children first.
Yeah, and maybe, well, yes, but that to me is more, because that's trying to choose the weaker ones, right? Like in inverted commas, you choose the weaker ones who couldn't fight for themselves, thinking, oh, if you let the men in the water, maybe they can fight, they can live longer in the water until rescue comes, right?
It's also it's both weakness, but sometimes it's also they can perpetuate the species, right?
A
Women
woman
can
and a
give
child.
birth.
Yes, women can give birth,
And
but
children
men
are
can,
young.
but women can't give birth without men.
They'll figure it out. There are men where they're going, no? But they always say it's genetic and also weakness as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not agreeing with the weakness argument, but
Uh-huh.
that's, I think, traditionally is why we say
Usually it's
women
the
and children
rationale, right?
first, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. Because then even in, this is not a good comparison, but like work camps, right, which are horrible. They used to they'd keep the women, keep the men who could work for longer, right, and the women and children they'd discard. And let's not talk about what happened to them. But that argument is not necessarily where we want to go down.
Well,
Yeah.
but it's one set.
It's one way
Way
of
to look
doing
at
it.
So
yeah.
gender is one way.
Or there's age,
Mhm.
purely
Uh,
age.
What would the
Health.
rationale be around age?
Age.
Let's go
Yeah.
with that one.
Yeah, what's the rationale
Age.
for
Well, I mean, again, not traditionally, but stereotypically, we say if you're older, you've lived for longer, you've lived your life, right? That's why do we think it's more tragic when children are killed or harmed?
Yeah. We always
right?
say that.
So why do
Children
we say
are
there's an
innocent.
untimely death? Yeah.
Exactly. They
Yeah.
don't deserve that. They've done nothing wrong. They're
haven't
not even
lived life.
fully formed, right?
Mm.
Whereas but then, and then if losing a child, gosh, this sounds horrible, but losing a child is usually worse than losing a husband or a peer or a father, right?
That's a
Lost
culture.
potential, they
Yeah.
say. It's-
Lost
Mhm.
potential, yeah.
So what would you age? What age would you think for that?
I mean, normally
I-
under 18 is children.
What?
Under 18 would be non-adults.
Yeah, that would be
right?
true. But
But we only have space for 10.
yeah.
And there could be 90 children in the water.
Okay, so now we have to let's say we are
Mhm.
choosing the girl children,
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm.
right? And there's 20 of those.
Mm-hmm. Then
So
what do
now
we do?
amongst those 20 girl children.
I'm sorry to say, but we have to go with now potential. Potential
Potential.
In what
Yes.
Ooh.
intelligence or the challenge. I'm sorry, we have to.
How do you do that? Here, take a 9Q test.
I'm sorry, but you have to. Not
Quick
IQ test.
on the boat.
Not IQ test,
I
but
know
we can
you're, I
figure
know
out.
you're
Creative
potentially
talent.
drowning.
Creative, we can creatively do a test to figure out
Oh.
what's their potential. Because if they're from an underdeveloped, and then they're entering a boat, for them to get on a boat and pay and get get opportunity from these rich people, they need to have some creativity, some smarts. You get. They're going onto a boat with people who will judge them. and
What about
everything.
health?
I don't
Health
think. I
to me
think
is more
intelligence is
important.
more than
I
health.
don't. Oh God, this is horrible. It all feels so callous.
How do you think
It's
they'll
like when
survive
there
in
was
the boat?
COVID, right? And you had 5 oxygen machines per hospital, and the old people, I hate to say it, but the old people and the sick people knew if there's a fight between me and a young healthy child with COVID, they're
gone.
getting the
Full of
machine.
my
Yeah, and you have no choice.
But this is a boat with rich people who are going to judge them. You need people who
Can we
can
just throw all the rich people off?
who can survive. Oh, we get more space. By throwing them overboard.
Can I throw something out there?
Wrong
And
choice of
and
words.
You just say it's first come first served basis.
Or draw lots.
Or draw
Jesus
lots,
used
make
to
it
do.
fair.
Remember in the storm?
No,
Make-
that's not fair. I'm so not for
That
randomness.
is the only
Ah.
fair way.
I am so not for randomness, honestly,
Really?
because it's not
How
ensuring
can you
survival.
choose? But then, okay, the problem is there you are choosing who is going to die. By choosing who will survive, you are choosing who is most likely going to drown.
Exactly. It's the
Unless
same
another
thing.
lifeboat comes within a few minutes.
Me, because it's the underdeveloped and developed thing. Like if this aspect was not there, we would draw lots. But for me, I'm thinking to give the underdeveloped people a chance, pick the best crop.
But who is defining the best, right? We've already talked about this. There's emotional intelligence. There's traditional intelligence, IQ. There's creative intelligence. There's street smarts. You know, who are you to
I would
say
go
that
for
kid is
creativity
more
and-
intelligent than
I'd
that?
say creativity and street smarts. That's what will take them far. In that boat with rich people. If this is the only chance
And
to
what
get...
if-
how long are
What
they
if
getting
most
to
of
land?
these are 2, 3, 4, 5, 6-year-olds? How are we
Who?
testing them? What if they're 2, 3, 4, 5, 6-year-olds?
Okay, I'm sorry, those ones are gone.
What? This is not critical thinking, Akumu. This
thrown
is
the
just
babies
ruthless
overboard.
murder.
Not overboard, but...
Throw all the
Very
babies in the
you
water.
don't... Like... Honestly, me, I'm not looking at under 10s. I'm sorry.
Ah, so interesting. Because I was saying under 18 would classify as not an adult.
Me, under
You're
the
saying
age of
under
reason,
10?
I don't see any point.
No,
I'm
but-
sorry. Yeah. They have to be... young, for me, for choosing young people and going age, I choose 25 to 8. Because you can talk to them.
Wow.
It's brutal,
Wow.
right? But we have to make a
You're
choice.
very brutal, yeah.
We have to make a choice. It's 10
I mean,
spots.
you are thinking more rationally than me in some respects.
You're
so
feeling sorry for people.
I don't want anyone to die. Like, how can we...
But you're bringing activism here. You're like, now that it's rich countries,
Me,
just everything.
Yeah,
for
you need
me,
to be able
it's
to
survival.
different-
If we are going to survive and the developed have to survive the brutality of rich people's minds in that boat, we have to choose very specifically. It's not just survival, it's thriving. They have to thrive in that boat. If the boat is like 6 months, hey, we have to choose intelligence. I'm sorry.
Okay,
If it was like a week, maybe we can get the kids.
No, I'm seeing your point of view. I just can't get my brain past. Yeah, whoever we're not choosing, we are just sending them to their death.
It's tragic.
And not choosing is you have to do. You
But
have
you
to just
don't
think.
have. Do you have to choose?
Compartmentalize.
Do you have to choose, or you can randomize it?
I don't know
Or
why I'm
you
against the
can be-
randomness.
Even more incredibly cold and say it's just one of each category. One old, one middle aged,
One disabled.
one with a disability. Yeah, like
But
that
how
be a
would you
very big
choose?
debate.
But if there are 10 disabled people now, it adds another aspect.
And then who is more disabled than the other?
Oh God, yeah, amen. Neither, like the blind one is worse than the one without the leg. Like it brings other worse things.
so then you
But
could
yeah.
randomize it amongst that category.
True. Randomness
Right?
is the easy thing to do.
It's becoming very complex.
Yeah. So at least you get inclusion, you get like a representation of all. Because here we're saying almost if you've got to represent the earth, right, or repopulate the earth.
Yes, if you have to repopulate,
Right, we're not just going to choose the strongest ones.
We
Because
have
that's
to
what
choose
traditionally,
creativity.
that is what traditionally the patriarchy would have us would
Yes.
want us to do, which we are not
Oh
doing.
no, the patriarchy has not
That's what
come in.
slavery did, right? Choosing the
Yes,
strong.
exactly.
Yes.
Yeah, that's why women, children, the what was it called? The infirm, right? Anyone ill or with a disability,
Discarded.
Yeah.
God.
which we're not. I don't know. But then, like you say, if you actually need people to survive, because even once you're on the lifeboat, life ain't gonna be easy.
Yep. Even just a
So you're
conversation with
taking up a space on the lifeboat by someone who might not even then make it to dry land.
yes.
When someone else in the water could have helped to steer that, but maybe we need skills.
I think so, and that's part of when I
Steering,
think.
navigation.
You see, we say yes to the Yes Girls podcast
Also
to give you skills
boating
to
skills.
suggest.
Yes, boating, survival.
Okay, that's another aspect.
Right?
Yes. But
Yeah,
those
'cause
are
this is
there are
just
two
a
things
floating
to think.
lifeboat.
So there are skills for us to get to land, and then there are also skills
That's-
for you to survive on this boat with this.
But for them to get to
opportunities
land,
to survive in land.
people who have survival skills, people who actually can survive.
But what if they're the ones who will make it on land, but they can't survive in the boat? You see?
Yeah, but
That's
then they
another
won't.
thing.
They just might not make it to land.
He's
so
like
what's
an
the point?
inventor of I don't know something. We have to save that person. He will make the
Something very useful.
underdeveloped.
On land.
Yes, but he's useless on the boat. So you have to think both ways.
He might,
Utilities.
but then he might then do a disservice to everyone else on the boat
But when you get to land, he'll make sense.
if they get to land.
Yeah, we have to check.
So even utility has.
Yeah.
Wow.
Utility on the boat, utility on the land, survivors if you can survive. So if those sick people who can't survive should not even get on the boat. Sorry.
Or
To look at health.
so also we're saying there's already people on this boat.
Yeah.
No, I was going to say you put it to popular vote, but that would be horrible. Or everyone chooses. No.
That's where now they'll choose. Oh God, don't tell humans to choose.
No.
I have a question.
Not the
Where are
ones on the
you
boat.
when you're making this decision? Are you in a very powerful boat that's passing? Or are you in the water? Or are you in the boat?
Oof, if you're in the water, it's a very different case. Because I'll be like, why am I not? One of the
No, I
ten.
think we are on the boat.
You're on
Right?
the boat deciding.
We are the ones deciding.
Yeah.
So you have the option of throwing people off.
Oh my
Ah.
God. Now that makes it interesting.
Yeah.
So all the male chauvinists, all the patriarchy people, you know, the useless rich minds that are doing nothing for the world, they're
But
all
see,
out.
again, we are being incredibly subjective in all of this, right? Saying this is important, like creativity is important. This is important. What about,
Exactly. And I think you've really shown some of the elements of critical thinking here, because when we're having this discussion, all of you brought your own biases, and sometimes you're not aware of that. So some of it is, for you, it's very clear. You've said that the fact that there's developed countries versus developing is very important to you, because in your scheme of things, and I've heard you say a few times the rich, all of that. So for you, you're bringing that lens about what the struggle is about. I think on your side, there was this idea of who is more fragile, right? Like the fact that, and we did say that is actually something that historically has come into this kind of discussion, because if somebody is a baby, they have more of their life to live. And that one is more of an equitable argument, right? Where you're saying life is the greatest gift. These other people have gotten this gift, so let's give a chance to somebody else, right? That's another one. But then there's the utility argument, and that one comes up a lot. And that one is this idea that to deserve to live, you have to have some utility. And that's a very
my
big
thinking.
assumption. It's a very big assumption, because other people would say by being, you have inherent value, right? That's, so the fact that somebody is smart, to the extent we can even decide what is smart, right? Because there's so much debate now about the different kinds of intelligences and the value that they bring. Even then, the question is, should we be determining whether someone gets to live or die because of their contribution? Which you almost don't think about it, because it's such a given in the way we think about things, right? And then there's another frame which you brought up. I was so proud of you guys, where you said that there's even the question about, do I get to be the one to say? So this idea of drawing lots is a humility, because what you're saying is that it's almost not for me to say. There's some people who say, and you'll hear this in some public policy debates, that the decision of life, when they say, are you playing God? Like none of us should ever be in a position or the right to really decide if somebody lives or dies. So all of those things came into this discussion, although sometimes we're not always aware that we're speaking within that particular frame. And then there's the one which is like throwing the frame out and saying that this idea that there's a boat and there's water and there's 100 people, what if I reject that? And say, what if I want to change the scenario? What if I'm in a big boat passing by that has lots of space for me to put everybody on it? Usually when people present a dilemma, you agree to their frame, but especially when it's a politician or somebody who's trying to blackmail you, you need to be very aware of the frame that they're trying to put you inside, right? And to sometimes push back, because sometimes it can be really a way of squeezing you into a corner that you don't have to be in, huh? So very interesting. We're a very tough question.
Very hard.
You guys did a very noble attempt. As for the girl child, she's safe with you, I can see.
For me, not the child.
As long
not
as
the
she's
child.
over 10.
As long as she's over 7
over
years.
10 years.
Oh, that's right. Between 7 and then she can be older than 18. So only teenage girls.
Yeah.
Twins.
For me, I was very specific about the boundaries.
You're quite ruthless.
I am ruthless.
Yeah.
But
When
it's a decision to make, and it's not a real thing. I can be ruthless. But I think you're not ruthless, even in a hypothetical situation.
No, because it's awkward. It's very uncomfortable. It's a very uncomfortable, even
Impossible.
hypothetically.
Yeah.
But is it because you're a mother?
No, I don't.
Because
think
she's a
so.
human.
I'm a human. You
But
have
I'm
no
not
empathy.
human.
You do not have a feeling bone in your body.
When it comes to hypothetical, I get inside and I'm like, nothing else matters. What are we doing? Let's do it.
But I really like what you said, Laila, about the frame. So what you're saying is, if you actually, when people are trying to manipulate you or have a critical conversation, exploration, if you both, maybe you don't both agree to the frame that you're discussing, but one of the interlocutors imposes that frame on the other person, which can actually make them back them into a corner, and that is a form of almost emotional manipulation, right? Or conversation. And politicians, you think, often do that.
Yeah, but humans too. I think sometimes you have to just be aware yourself of a frame, and we'll talk more about that when you're being put in a box, because many times we accept the frame without even realizing that it's happening. Sometimes it happens when someone's trying to sell. This sale is running out. If you don't pay now, if you don't buy now, this will happen. And it's a very human thing to now rush and try and buy the thing. But if you're aware that this person is putting pressure on me, you can decide, right? And sometimes the way people present things can make you feel, like you have... It just puts more pressure on you. And there's a way that we think as humans that it's natural to feel that pressure and respond to it. So you need to discipline your mind to be able to discern when these kinds of tricks are being used on you. There's another thing called the anchoring effect. When somebody's negotiating with you, they can name a high figure first. And even though you negotiate from there, that thing is called an anchor. So now you're working from around the figure that they quoted. Things like that. So if you're aware of yourself, it can really help. Yeah, some of these
and
tricks.
I think also that's the trick you did also. You didn't give us where we were. So we were already assuming we are just around there, either on the boat or on the water. Which means we should have just thought, okay, she didn't put us anywhere. So we can be in another boat that has space.
Are we amongst the 10 or are we amongst the 90?
Yeah, like we assumed
Or
where
are we
we were.
God? Or
We didn't think beyond that. Yeah. So that's a very good.
Don't get boxing.
Yeah. All right. So before we move on to before we dive more into those waters, to extend the metaphor, how would you rate us? How did we do?
I actually was quite impressed. I think you could be more aware of, and we'll talk about that, if you could get more onto the balcony, meaning you see the whole situation from above and you try and zoom out a little bit to see more options like we talked about. That would be something that you could work on. But I did find that you were very good at offering a number of different theories. So there was utility, there was opportunity, there was this idea of, do I get to play God? So you used many different criteria to debate what criteria should we be using. That is actually quite an advanced way of thinking, There's some people who might kind of get stuck at a more pedestrian level, at a lower level of thinking, but you guys at least immediately moved to criteria, and then you played around and debated about different options. Yeah? And even within gender and utility, remember you refined it a bit. You were talking about utility on the boat versus utility on land. And then when you talked about gender, you kind of transposed with that this idea of, so it's a girl, but then it's a girl of a certain age. So you didn't do very badly. But there's still some thinking exercises that we could do to make it more. Yes, well done.
Thank you for this.
So out of 10?
I would say that was definitely a 7 or 8.
Nice.
Okay.
Yeah,
Both of us
not
equal.
bad.
Both of us equal, or who would you? Which of us two would you put in the lifeboat?
You want her to zoom out and see.
That's really interesting. I feel like Claire had many more. You had a wider toolbox of options of different kinds of criteria. I found that you were much more practical and pragmatic. Sometimes, if you're in a theoretical situation, you really want Claire with you because she opens up the panorama of options. But if we're really on a boat and we're about to drive,
time is running out.
Yeah. I'll get out a whiteboard so we can figure things out. Meanwhile, everyone's dying around us.
as you're now mapping out.
Yeah. So no one survives.
Yeah, Claire is thinking of everyone. Me, I'm just thinking time. Who is dying now?
Time
Who
is
living
wasting.
now?
So usually in life, and there's something called DeBono Thinking Hats. That's an exercise that can help with this. When you're approaching a problem, sometimes it's good to have people with different thinking styles. So when it's in real life, you really want to have a Claire and an Akumu with you. But sometimes you also want somebody who thinks about the process. You know, how are we going to decide? Then you need somebody else who's very pessimistic, someone who thinks everything is going to work out. And sometimes really good decisions are made that way. But you don't always have that luxury under pressure. Yeah. So diversity is always good for decision making. Different viewpoints always help.
So what happens if you're two of us? We have to put different hats on.
Exactly. And you need to understand that each person's viewpoint actually brings value.
Yeah.
In relationships, that can be very helpful. In the workplace, that can be helpful. And studies show that diversity, that's why decisions get better. But you have to learn to manage that so that it doesn't degenerate into conflict or just confusion. Yeah.
Well, let's cover this more in the questions, because I often find that if you give too many people a voice and there's not a clear process for actually finding the decision, you just end up with 100 options and no outcome.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
especially
you've wasted a lot
smart
of time.
people, it doesn't help.
Yes.
At some point, you have to decide and move. Yeah.
Okay, so let's take a break and then we'll ask you some more questions.
Great.
Now, Laila, we want to know how you implement this in your day-to-day. What does critical thinking really mean to you?
It's a great question, and it means many different things. And we're hearing a lot that 21st century skills, critical thinking is at the heart of it. So for me personally, it really means getting out of my own way and becoming, when I think, becoming more discerning, becoming more deliberate, and becoming more disciplined in the way that I think. Why this is important is because it helps me examine the process with which I get to a conclusion, and that ideally makes my decisions better. They get to better outcomes. So that's what it means. When I say it's getting in my own way, it's because, as we shall discuss, I mean, a lot of us, when we're left to our own devices, think in quite a sloppy way. We tend to be quite emotional. There's cognitive biases and other kinds of biases we bring to bear. And all of those get in the way of making the best decision. And sometimes we can even whip ourselves up into bad decisions. So for me, being aware of those shortcomings in myself and in you, as the people with whom I converse and live and interact, it helps me help us all be better in the way we make decisions.
Amazing.
3 Ds. Was it discerning?
Deliberate.
Disciplined. I like that. Wow.
It's easy to be lazy.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, let's just do the stereotype today.
Yeah. Let me just go with the way you have said. Yeah.
Yeah. Or letting your emotions get in the way of good decisions, right?
Emotions is actually the better one. I mean, this laziness one is the one that is more the default, because who wants to make an effort when you can just go with the flow? So the idea is really, I like to think twice about the evidence that's put in front of me, or the scenario, or the options. So just thinking twice and pushing back a little bit at the assumptions that come with that decision.
So there's two things I'd love to dig into a little bit. So one was the DeBono's Thinking Hats, which I think I have come across before, and it's a really interesting concept, even when it's just you or when it's a group, especially a group of very similar thinkers. Sometimes that can actually box you all in together. And then the other thing is, if you have a big group of people who have very diverging opinions, can you give an example or even a guide, a couple of points of how can you actually then say, we need to make a decision, right? Because like I said, if I'm with a team, if I'm consulting my team professionally and say, okay, we need to make a decision, everyone air your opinion. You have 10 different opinions. Who makes the final decision? Because then you could do a whole consultative session, and in the end, it's still just one person making the decision. Perhaps just that process is enough to make people feel involved and feel that they have some ownership of the decision. But if the decision is not the one that they wanted, then what?
Yeah, that's a whole discipline, because so with DeBono's hats, what it says is that you are taught to get the discipline of putting on another hat. So it also helps you become a more diverse thinker, right? Because many of us, some of us wear a black hat all the time, which is the more pessimistic hat, right? Some of us wear the yellow hat, and that's the one which is very optimistic. And then you have people who wear the white hat and come at every discussion from the point of view of facts. And then red hat is the one that is more emotional. So, some of us are more heart people, other people are more head people. So what DeBono's hats does in an exercise where you're making a decision or brainstorming, especially generating ideas, is that it asks you, now we're all in a red hat moment. And all of you have to practice red hat.
That's
like, what is your heart
brilliant.
saying? And then we all get to kind of tap into that part of ourselves, which we all have. Then now we're all in yellow hat. And so you all learn to do that. And so that surfaces all the concerns. And sometimes for those people who don't speak up as much, it can be a way of giving them the space to articulate what's really on their minds, especially if your boss and the organization you're in tends to be yellow hat and you're a black hat person. You might feel sometimes that your voice is not as easily welcome. So this gives us all a chance to talk about what are all the things that could go wrong with this idea. Once everything is surfaced, you now come up to the other problem, which is at the end of the day, after we've heard all of this, we do tend to see that once people have had a chance to voice and they've seen that they've been heard, they're more comfortable going with whatever the consensus decision is at the end of the day, or even the vote or whatever it is, if it's not consensus. So that's always good to get people feeling that their concerns were heard. But after that, you never get away from the fact that as a leader, somebody has to decide at the end of the day. We can't go round and round. And sometimes when you decide, there's winners and losers, right? So that decision, now there's a whole other methodology, maybe another podcast, about what does leadership really mean, right? When some people feel they didn't get what they want, and how do you get buy-in, and how do you then move forward as a group and get people to really defend the decision as if it was theirs. And there's a whole kind of science and art around that as well. Yeah.
Gosh, and it's true. There's something about strong leaders that I respect, where they can make decisions that are very decisive. I mean, by their name, they should be decisive, but very well informed, right? And I think that's probably a quality of a leader, right? Being able to make informed decisions efficiently that sometimes not everyone will agree with. But I think I'm a strong believer in consultation, right? And asking people their opinions. And I love the hats for that.
It can help that.
And I like the way you said, like, just because I've had another idea that I didn't have, I understand, like Claire, I was understanding her point of view just because I had it. So even if her idea wins, I understand why it won. So the way you said, like, being heard gives everyone a chance to understand.
Leadership is partially that, but I also think that the more you become the more senior you go, let's say you're a president, it's almost the brand of a good leader that you're able to make decisions in ambiguity. So you have information, you know how to get as much information as you want, but you get to a point where it's so ambiguous and the right decision is not clear and all the information hasn't come in, but the boat is sinking. right? And so a leader has to decide, even though some people are going to lose. That's one of the hardest, most lonely, most heartbreaking things about being a senior leader. And no matter what decision you make, you will be criticized. But you have to keep going, and you have to build the muscle to not, otherwise that's the whole point of leading, right? Then otherwise you're following, right? And that's a very big topic about really helping leaders not get kind of disintegrate under that pressure. Yeah, but that's a different podcast.
That's probably an entire season.
Yeah, we need to be taking notes of episode ideas. So it's obviously, I mean, you've not talked about specific examples from your career or profession, but do you think that these skills are as important in other professions or all professions as it is for you in your life?
Yeah, I think these skills, and that's why they're mentioned so often now as a key skill for the 21st century and for the digital, the fourth industrial revolution. It's not about even professional. I think these are skills for life. So as we are living now, you know that we are undergoing a deluge of information. In social media, on the internet, on the news, it's overwhelming. In fact, some people are calling it an infodemic, right? We're just, there's so much data. And when you go online, there's people selling you stuff. They're selling you their ideas, they're selling you things, they're selling you viewpoints and political positions. It goes on and on. So if you're a voter, you need to have these skills, because that helps you become a better citizen. You're able to discern between different political positions before you can go in and say, I'm worthy of voting. You should have done your homework. But if you don't know how to discern, it's very easy for you to be manipulated. As a consumer, there's all kinds of charlatans selling stuff, right? Lots of quacks, all kinds of things. And you need to be able to assess when somebody tells you this product, and now it's so common, this product is going to keep you young forever, or this thing is going to, or, drink, what was it? Bleach, and your COVID will go away. These kinds of things. And, there's people who are following these ideas and believe them. So critical thinking can help us push back against those things, right? And then at the workplace, employers are saying this is what they really want from employees. But more importantly, even in your relationships, if you're not able to understand what your own triggers are, you can be somebody who's easily manipulated in a bad way, or you let people down just because you don't know yourself well enough to be able to make good relationship decisions. So this investment is really, really important, not just in the professional world, but in life.
Okay. You're making me think. We've just started a construction project, and I'm letting my husband lead on procurement because he's a procurement specialist. Let's just say he's wearing one hat, I think, which could be a good thing because he's kind of hyper-focused. But I think you need to see things from different perspectives sometimes to make sure you are getting the right deal or you're taking the right direction, right? When buying cement and foundation stones, if you just take it as a box-ticking exercise, you're not necessarily... And enjoying the process as well. Would you say part of it is also enjoying the process of decision making or analyzing a situation, exploring it?
I love it. And I love this idea of having options. Like this idea of the frame. Imagine if you're able to expand the frame a bit more. It really gives you many more options than you thought you had. So it's a discipline that can also really free and allow you also to be much more resilient, because how you look at a situation has a lot to do with how you feel about it. So if you could change the way you look at it, sometimes it can heal.
Nice.
Yeah.
Do you have other tools apart from, stepping out of the frame, the hats? Do you have other tools and tricks you can share?
Sure. So for myself, as I said, I try to get out of my own way. And a big part of it is really challenging my own assumptions. I'm very suspicious of myself. So one of the things I like to think about is my thoughts. All our thoughts are like a wild horse. So imagine this thing, and when they talk about emotion, sometimes it's low blood sugar, whether you had lunch. When they say a hungry man is an angry man, some of these things really have wisdom, right? And so when you come at a situation, you're about to break up with somebody, on the spot, sometimes it's good to think about, where is this coming from inside me? What is this triggering from inside me? And so learning to see your thoughts as something that are just occurrences outside of yourself that you can assess and decide, is this a useful thought? Is it serving me? Is this idea or viewpoint really making me better, or is it something I ought to reject? Instead of seeing your thoughts, whether they're depressive or euphoric, as something that you have to follow, right? So that's a one tool. I think there's also the tool of understanding your own weaknesses and being very, very intimate with self-awareness, right? So with that is that, what are my biases? Yeah, so in your case, we talked about the boat. There's a way you look at the world, and it's important for you to know you look at the world that way, because much like the hats, it can help you see whether you're limiting yourself by seeing it through that lens, right? And it can open up. What are my biases? What is my baggage? What experiences in my past have informed the way I'm approaching this situation, and how can I free myself a little bit from that, right? And there's also battles, things that you continue to struggle with. So what are my biases? And those biases can be personal, but there's also cognitive biases, just about the way the human brain is structured. There's certain heuristics or shortcuts that we use. If we didn't, we would go crazy. Because imagine if you saw every single human being of every single race, of every single age, and you took each person into account, it would be overwhelming. So we do have to classify people quickly to make decisions and make our way in the world. But sometimes those heuristics can be harmful, and they can make you stereotype, as you had talked about. Yeah, so biases and baggage are important to bear in mind. And then another tool I use, and I'll stop on this one because there's many more, is the idea of the balcony. So when we have, let's say, office politics, or the family is falling apart, the extended family has a dispute, I try to think about those people being on a dance floor and everything happening, the office politics, and I walk carefully up to the balcony and I look down. I'm outside of it. And then from there, I'm able to see who is feeling left out, what could be happening, what are the trends that could be driving this, as opposed to seeing myself as inside. You know, who stepped on my toe? What do they mean by that? Instead, remove yourself, even if it's psychologically and in your own head. And sometimes that can calm you down and help you see angles that you hadn't seen before. And it can help you be much more useful than just being part of the drama. Yeah.
I like that. And that physical extraction as well. It can really help, even visualizing it. Like you said, not thinking, oh, someone stepped on my toe, and taking things personally. I think we've talked about it before on the podcast, how sometimes if we take things personally, we can go crazy. Right? So another question, just to add to that, is, would you say surrounding yourself with a greater diversity of people is a healthy thing to do? You know, I usually am around people who are quite open-minded, liberal, somewhat educated. You know, in the UK, my friends are all left-leaning, and, you know, you surround yourself with people who are quite similar to you. But can that be a dangerous thing when it comes to this?
Oh, it's actually one of the most dangerous things for critical thinking. You're absolutely right. You really want to discipline yourself to always disconfirm your biases, right? So it's one thing. I mean, we all are drawn to people who are like us, but especially at this time in our kind of planet's history, we really need to seek out people who challenge. And we always say that an idea is more useful to you if, an idea that contradicts what you already know is more useful than just one more that's confirming what you already know. This is what we call about the white swan, black swan dilemma. So there's a time when we all said swans are white. And then once there was someone in Europe who found a black swan. And what that did is that it revised our view of what a swan is, right? So you really always in your life need to be looking out for black swans, because you want to get closer to the truth. And the truth is never achieved. It's always a path and a process, but you always want to put yourself in a position where you're surrounding yourself with people who kind of make you a little bit uncomfortable just so that you stretch. And they say that in your neurological processes, that's actually good for your brain. It keeps you younger, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Because it's
neurons
annoying the brain, so the neurons have to work harder.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But now I'm wondering, if you're doing that consciously, especially now in terms of content, so I know I don't want to listen to Andrew Tate, but if I go and listen to him to open up my, to make my neurons work harder, would you suggest things like that? Yeah.
Yes, because what you're challenging yourself, though, is to, one, observe yourself so that you get to know yourself better, right? So you're asking, if you feel your heart rate starting to race, what is he saying that's upsetting me? And what about it is making me... So it's almost like a research project on yourself.
Interesting.
And then the other discipline is, what could he be saying that has a string of truth? A little shred of truth, so that you start to become a wiser person, right? And you're always getting more and more evidence about how the world works. Because even the craziest people, I won't name any in particular, but there's usually something.
There's an aspect of...
And then if 80 million people have voted for you, there's something you're saying that is resonating with people, right?
And why?
Why?
And then you figure it out.
And what you mentioned about perspective really comes into that, because I often find if I disagree with someone, I try to see things from their perspective and think, okay, I completely disagree with them, but they're coming from a different place. So let me understand why they might think that. Even if I don't believe it and I can forever disagree, that is their worldview. That shapes part of their entire existence. So I need to somehow understand where that comes from and find some way to identify with it, to if I want to engage in a conversation with them, or if I want to see
the big thing
them.
about being human is many times we have a lot more in common. I mean, there's some people who are really,
Crazy.
This is batshit crazy, but I think on the other hand, there's certain areas in which we can assume most people want their children to thrive. They want to have clean air. They want to. So I find sometimes in our political discourse, we make it sound like the corporations or there's certain people who we put in a box and say these people are evil and irrational. But usually that's not the case. There's usually a human being behind these faceless corporations. What are they after? What do they want? And how can we find common ground that way? And I'm not trying to be Pollyanna-ish, but really it is a fact that very few people are so off the rails, just from a bell curve point of view, that they're completely irrational. There's something they're seeing and something they're after that you can possibly understand as a human.
Yeah, and finding some common ground with people and humanizing people we disagree with can be very healthy for us to feel less anger or less othering or...
And less fear, right?
Yes,
because
fear,
if people are completely irrational, then there's a good reason to be very afraid. Because they could do anything at any time, right?
Exactly. We can at least understand they're grounded in some reality. We have a shared reality,
Even if we don't
even if they're
understand
interpreting it differently.
Yeah, for some.
Yeah, not everyone.
Not everyone.
Without naming names. So one little question. Well, is it little or it's big? Are some people just born with it, with the ability to engage in critical thinking and naturally do all these things without having to know that it was a scientist or a psychologist that came up with this concept? Or can these skills be acquired? Like, do you have to be born with it, or can it be acquired?
So I would say what we're born with is a propensity not to be critical thinkers. That we're all born with. And I do think, we said that between the wild horse, that is your thoughts, mostly driven by chemicals and hormones and who knows what, and this idea that we have biases and have heuristics to try and make it into the world, we actually have a leaning and a bias, sorry to use the word in this other way, towards non-critical thinking. So very few people are born with it, if anybody at all. But there are some personality types that lend themselves more to that balcony and all of that. But mostly all of us have to do this work. And so we do think it can be learned, and it's something that I really promote people to practice. It's like a muscle, right? Where you learn to think more critically, to be more discerning. And it's something that's a lifelong pursuit, but it's very, very helpful. And it can make your quality of life much better.
And some of the tools you've given aren't grandiose
or very academic.
You need to read a whole book for. No, they're just simple things that you can challenge yourself to in specific scenarios, whether it's professional or personal, in relationships. So I really like that these are really easy to apply to try and work that muscle.
Yeah. And in this reality, because it's filled with increasingly polarized views, the ones we have to watch to give exercise to our neurons. How do you see critical thinking coming in to save the day?
I do think that in the current political climate, in Kenya, in Africa, in the world, it's true that critical thinking is really needed. If we're going to make a way forward with the polarization that is happening, it's very negative, it's very toxic, and we need to do better. But as an individual, you can't change everybody else, but as an individual, there's certain things you can do to make your way and to be more healthy in a very unhealthy world at present. One of them is just to examine yourself, as we talked about self-awareness, but ask yourself about your premises and define your terms. What does this mean? In law school, they taught us this a lot, right? Because you're taught logic. And what that really means is that when you use a term, try and understand, especially when you're in debate with somebody, what that term means, right? Define a term. So for example, if you say, in Kenya, we need to be free. What do people mean by free? Or if somebody says this is free speech, I saw in the Gen Z protests that many people felt that we need to protest. And if the government says you cannot go to parliament or you cannot come to CBD, that is cutting off our rights. However, under our constitution and across the world, it is very well known that freedom of expression has natural limits, right? There's a time, place, and manner restriction. So when you see images online of people voting, I don't know, what is it, Black Lives Matter or whatever, people protesting, you can't usually tell from the TV, but usually the reason why the police are able to protect them is because they're an enclosed area. They explained when they were coming, it's bounded, and a lot of cars and other people are going to work and carrying on with their lives. When you say occupy everywhere, the police can't help you. It's not constitutional. You see, so some of these things, when you say I have freedom of expression, it's really important to go and understand that freedom has what kinds of bounds. When I say freedom of expression, do you mean freedom of expression? Are we talking about the same things? So that when you're debating, whether it's about Israel and Palestine, or it's about, the abortion debate, or it's about who knows what it is, even reject finance bill, for example, when people are saying that, do they understand that? Do they mean we want it withdrawn and then there's no spending in Kenya for 6 months? Or do we mean remove this particular part? Or are we saying we want to sit with you and renegotiate clause by clause? Sometimes that doesn't lend itself to us. We're just marching to express our displeasure. But it's very different when you come and you start having a conversation if you haven't agreed on what you mean by whatever your demand is and how you're phrasing things. Yeah? So premises and definitions are very important. And we always say define your terms and make sure you've clarified your premises before going into conversation and debate, because you could be having a heated argument and you're talking about completely different things.
Right.
And that's why you're not meeting.
That's very true. I think that's happened thrice this week, where someone just assumed that I know what they're talking about. And I noticed 3 times that I think they just assumed I understand. So I've started practically just asking, do you mean this? Because even me, now they assume I understand, and me assume I've understood. Two problems. And it will going to cause a misunderstanding
that
later.
Will
so
cause,
I'm
that can cause conflict for no reason. So you're not having a conflict about the actual
issue,
grounds for debate, the issue, but you'll actually have conflict later on because you're just not even talking about the same thing.
Yeah. And Claire is very good at clarifying things. Sometimes sometimes I'm very vague in my messaging. She's always very clarifying. Crisp. Do you mean this? And then now that happened to me as someone who, now I had to ask someone else that. So it's interesting to be very aware of these things.
Yeah. Another thing you can do in the political environment is you could think about maybe saying, I don't know about that. Another thing I've noticed a lot in political debate, and I think it's because now we can all Google something. You can read it for 10 minutes and now you're an expert. So really getting into the discipline of saying, I don't know anything about, how to, prevent COVID. So I will listen to the experts. And then you need to build and invest in understanding how to assess relative evidence, scientific evidence. Causation is not correlation is not causation, and things like that. I think you also can think about this idea of that's the theory. Just think that's the theory. What does that do for you? It means that you could have a point of view, but it's a working point of view. Always ready. Remember, swans are white. Always ready in case there's a black swan, right? So I'm not saying swans are white, but you can say swans are white so far, right? So you're always open. So I don't know, and swans are white so far. That's the theory. At least that's my working theory at this time. That helps you remain humble and always ready to learn. And then the last one I would say, you already raised this, is about diversifying who you're listening to, especially now with the YouTube and Google algorithms. It's really possible for you to get into a complete rabbit hole where you're listening to people like you're getting more and more extreme and you're not aware of it. So you need to be very careful about making sure that you're building the skills not just to assess evidence so that those quacks and charlatans don't get you, but also so that you're listening to other voices and keeping yourself as a broad, educated, enlightened person. Otherwise, you can find yourself to have gone quite quite some ways down the rabbit hole.
Yeah, and I think the older we get, the more stuck we are. Like I know
You
I'm
fall in
approaching
love with
40. You're stuck in like rigidity. So I think even this podcast just helps us open our minds to a lot of things. Yeah.
So for politics, those things can help. Yeah, there's many more, but those are the key ones that can keep you kind of agile in your opinions. Yeah.
Nice.
Great. Hey, there's some really practical steps here, and we'll be recapping some of these and sharing the resources in the show notes so that people can read up a bit more, find out more. Are there any resources you might recommend people to check out if they want to reflect on themselves or get out of their own way?
Yeah, we'll be working quite a bit on Aspen Africa, on the Aspen Africa Institute, to really bring much more of this content to young people and old people alike.
Nice.
Depending on how you categorize yourself. Because we think unless we make an investment in this critical thinking field, a lot of us are going to be in much more distress than we need to be. I hope we can do much more together, and we'll be sharing more resources, but that's one way we could get started.
Awesome.
Great. We'll share the link to that in the show notes for sure. So thank you, Laila. I think we, as the Yes Girls, and hopefully our listeners as well, feel more ready to take on the world.
This was so much fun. Thank you.
Thank you.
We learned so much. I just couldn't take notes. I'll just listen back to it.
This is one of the episodes we will actually listen back to it ourselves to really think on it and go deeper. So you can find Laila at Laila Macharia, that's Laila Macharia, and Aspen, you can find them at Aspen Initiative Africa. And of course, the Yes Girls are on all social media platforms at Yes Girls Podcast. Why not send this episode to a friend who has ambitions to be a better person, a more critical thinker, or more empathetic conversationalist, or send a favorite episode to a neighborhood WhatsApp group. Share the do, be, learn, love. You never know where it might take you.
And then some thank yous.
We could never be critical of our marvelous producers, Sampisha Productions with Rioba and Ernest at Snowball Studios in Nairobi.
And we think a lot, not just critically, about Pedro Brian, the wonderful musician who composed our theme song, as well as Kags, who designed the very critical and beautiful logo that you see every day.
Now, one more thing, Laila, before you go. We ask all our guests, what is something that you've recently said yes to? Something new. It could just be small, like a new dish, or it could be big, a life-changing decision.
So for the weirdest reason, I agreed to spend my summer in the UK. It was a very big step. It cost something, but I felt that it was really important to do something over the top that would stretch me. And so we ended up visiting Scotland and doing many different things, which have really, really helped me and the kids open their minds. So it was an investment that was a stretch, but really worth it. It would have been easier to just stay home and wait for, just push it down the road.
And go to Malindi.
Exactly.
And I hope the weather was kind to you.
Yeah, it was.
Perfect. All right, so
see you in the next episode for more saying yes to 21st century life skills with a live studio guest, because I am Akumu.
And I'm Claire.
And we have here
Laila Macharia. Thank you.
And together we are the Yes Girls. If you want to be a girl.
I can always join.
Yes,
anyone
part of
can
the
be a yes girl, no matter age, gender, disability.
Yes. And the
whether you're in the water, exactly.
You'll survive the boat.